Welcome back to the MOOC course on research writing. My name is Aradhana Malik and I am helping you with this course. And in the previous class, we were talking about how you establish your credibility. Now, in this particular class, we are going to finish the discussion on how you formulate good the reasons to support your claim. This is going to be a very brief class. Okay. So, establishing your credibility was one. We talked about demonstrating knowledge, establishing common ground and demonstrating fairness. Now, in this class, we are going to talk about using logical appeals. Now, how do you use logical appeals? You provide examples, you provide precedents, and maybe you also provide narratives. So, examples are, and then you can cite authority and testimony, you can establish cause and effect, and you can use inductive and deductive reasoning. Now, how do you provide examples? Providing examples, you can see, you need to find out whether examples are really the examples that exemplify whatever it is that you are talking about. Are they sufficient in strength or number to lead to a generalization? In what ways do they support your point? So, are they strong enough? Are they the quantity, is the quantity of the examples enough? Are they enough to support your to lead to a generalization? Then how do they support your point? How do the examples establish your point? Today I was having a discussion with one of my students who, again, we had final exams and I was grading papers, and this student came up to me and said, we were talking about some diagnostic model. I don't know if you've heard of so anyway, so a diagnostic model. Now, this gentleman had written the answers to a question in such a way that the diagnostic part of that model was not coming out. He had written everything about, not everything, but a lot of things that could be generalized. So, those things could be applied to a variety of things. However, the diagnosis part was not really written. So, I did not give him any marks, and he said, ma'am, but all of this is true. I said, yes, but the title of the question was specifically to elaborate on some diagnostic model. Now, even in the example, the diagnosis was not really coming out as well as it should have. So, he did not get any marks. So, that is what I am trying to tell you. You say, okay, all of this, the situation, for example, say let us talk about change management, that is the subject that I am teaching here. And there's something called as the Snyder's diagnostic model. Now, unless you start whatever you are saying by saying that in this diagnostic model, according to this model, the first step is to identify the dysfunctions in an organization. Everything else that you talk about is immaterial. Why? Because the example should also talk about identifying the dysfunctions, identifying where the problems are in order for the change to come about and solve those problems. So, now when we talk about examples, unless the example highlights whatever it is that you are trying to say, it is of no use. So, the fit between your example and whatever you are saying is very, very important. You can go on talking about why change management is important. Organizations depend on the change is propelled through a change in culture and this and that, but till you specifically mention that one has to really go and find out what is stopping the organization from performing as well as it should, you cannot talk about a diagnostic model. So, that is what I am talking about. So, your examples need to be hand in glove with whatever you are saying. They need to justify whatever it is that you are saying. Now, how closely does the precedent relate to the point that you are trying to make? Are the situations similar? What is a precedent? Precedent is a specific example of similar situations taken from the past. Examples are things that highlight a concept. Precedents are when you say this kind of study was undertaken 10 years ago, so I am also going to do it along similar lines. This was the justification provided 10 years ago, and I am also going to do it because it is valid even now. Precedents are what the law profession rests on in many cases. They pull out a precedent and then say, in case number so and so in X versus Y, this is what was done and this judgment was passed. So, taking that precedent has been established. So we will fall back on that precedent because we feel here is how that precedent applies to our situation. Okay. So how closely does the precedent relate to the point you are trying to make? Are the situations similar? If the situation is similar, by all means use that precedent and it will only support your claim, otherwise it will not. How timely is the precedent? Applicability of a couple of, of something from a couple of decades ago may not be valid today. Use of technology in the 1980s was very different from the use of technology today. So going back to my own dissertation, impact of media screen usage on the communicative competence of children. Now when I was growing up, that time media screen usage, the only media screen we knew about was a television. The Doordarshan India would start its telecast at 5:30 and close at 9:30. So we just had access to the television for 4 hours in a day. And I'm not that old. Okay. So I'm talking about several decades ago when I was growing up. Now if you take studies from that point, at that time people didn't even think that it would become such a big problem. The idea of the internet did not even exist. Okay. So if you take some study that was conducted on how the television is likely to affect child development or communicative development in children, it would not have made any sense. However, if you take studies, and since this is such a dynamic discipline, maybe if you were to take studies from the time these cable television channels started broadcasting their shows 24 hours and compare it to today, that might be of more relevance than taking a study that was done maybe 20 years ago or 25 years ago would have. So now this field is changing so fast that I cannot take the output of my own dissertation and use it today, because my own dissertation was completed 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago. So I cannot take that and apply it to life today, because things have changed so much. However, for certain things like how deviance in or maybe how management schools are run, how is the administration of management schools, or the training of teachers in engineering colleges or something like that. So if you were to take something different like that, or maybe talk about some historical aspect for which this timeline doesn't matter, maybe pre and post partition of India would matter. So something like that would be more, it would be applicable there, but the timeliness of the example that you provide is absolutely critical. Okay. Does the narrative support your thesis? Whatever you are saying support the claim that you made in the beginning? Will the story's significance to the argument be clear to your readers? Okay. Is the story one of several good reasons, or does it have to carry the main burden of the argument? So is the story that you are telling the only reason why you believe that whatever you are saying is true, or have you considered other diverse points of view to support whatever you are saying? So that's very, very important. Okay. How do you cite authority and testimony? Is the authority timely? So you are talking about the authority, the person who has talked about something. So you say an eminent researcher so and so. Now you are talking about in the case of historical evidence, maybe something that someone studied 100 years ago would also be valid. But when we talk about technology, the authority, again, it depends on when the authority's points of view were shared with the people. Is the authority qualified to judge the topic at hand? I have two very, very avid, one avid researcher, one budding researcher, soon to be researcher sitting in the room with me right now. Now they have very good ideas, they have a lot of they're very hardworking, whatever they say carries a lot of value. However, till now they have not established their credibility as eminent researchers. So whatever they say will be taken with a pinch of salt. So if I cite whatever they have done, it will not hold as much value as something that is being said by an established professor or a serving professor or somebody who has proven research capabilities. So, is the authority qualified to judge the topic at hand? How credible is the authority? I was trained in the social sciences. I am working in an engineering college. I have been asked to comment on engineering practices. I have been asked several times to comment on the authenticity of or the quality of presentations in areas like finance and operations and even information technology. I have no training or experience in these areas. So, my response to such requests is that I am sorry, I am not qualified to assess these things. And then I am asked, well, you know about research, you know what research should be and can be, so why don't you comment on this? And I say, yes, I know about research in the social sciences. I learnt research in the social sciences, but I don't know what kind of research can be done or should be done or is applicable in, say, operations management or operations research or finance or information technology. I am not qualified to assess the topic at hand. So, me commenting on something on operations, even though I am teaching in a management school, will not be and should not be considered to be of any value. Okay. Is the authority likely to be known and respected by readers? To cite an unfamiliar authority without some identification will lessen the impact of the evidence. Now, if you are a researcher, you would have seen that the affiliation of the authors is typically mentioned somewhere in the paper. Either an asterisk is put or superscript numbers are superscripted, and then you will find a footnote where the affiliation of the author is mentioned, or it may appear right alongside the title. Now, who is the author? What is the author saying? Why is the author saying, or why should you believe what the author is saying? The affiliation of the author matters. These days, because of internet connectivity, people know so much about each other. You can always look up a university. If it's mentioned there, you can always look up where the person is working, and the quality of what is written also gives you an idea. The quality of the publication that has accepted whatever has been said also gives you an idea about the quality of what might have been written. But it's also very important to know where, who the author is, who is saying what. For example, if you were to take, say, something written by, if I were to take something written by Professor Frank Dance, and he is well respected in the area of communication, he was my guide. If I were to take something that he wrote, people in the area of communication would know it, but these two people sitting in the room with me have probably never heard of him, so they don't know who he is. I know who he is. However, for management people, for these people, say the person of Professor C.K. Prahalad would carry much more value. Why? Because he is well known, well respected in the academic circles in management, and people in the area of communication studies would probably not know who he is. Okay. Similarly, in India, now we are working, I am working at IIT Kharagpur, my colleagues are studying here at IIT Kharagpur. So, when we mention IIT Kharagpur, immediately people recognize, and we say, okay, we belong to IIT Kharagpur. You would also have some affiliations. You mention the name of your university, your college, your school, people know about it. But if it is some place that people have not, you mention your name, people may not recognize you by the name. So, it is very, very important to know who is saying what, and occasionally, if whatever is being said is somehow, you are not able to relate to it, it's also important to know where this person is coming from, and that in turn gives you an idea of how credible this person's work may be. Now, whatever I am saying may be subject to discussion. People will say, does this mean that people from lesser known colleges will not be writing anything of value? That is not what I am saying. But the affiliation of the author, at least telling people that the author is working in a school or college as opposed to an independent researcher who's sitting at home and maybe doing very good work, would be considered much more reliable and credible. Okay. Are the authorities' credentials clearly stated and verifiable? These days, thanks to the internet, it is relatively easier to find out whether the authorities' credentials are verifiable. What is testimony? Testimony is the evidence that an authority presents in support of a claim. So, I say all research scholars should undergo training in research writing, and the testimony for that would be a comparison between research scholars who have not undergone training in research writing, the comparison of the research output of research scholars who have not undergone training in research writing with the output of the research scholars who have undergone training in research writing. So, the difference is clear, and I say, well, people who go through training in research writing are more likely to produce better quality research or better quality output, or publish in more places or in better places, or in good, more accepted or credible or reputed journals than people who have not undergone training in research writing. So, that becomes the evidence that, say, a faculty member at IIT Kharagpur is presenting in support of a claim that research scholars must undergo training in research writing. That becomes your testimony. Okay? All right. Using effective emotional appeals. When we use emotional appeals in research writing, emotional appeals are not really counted as credible. However, when you write a qualitative research paper, effective emotional appeals might be helpful. I am sorry about this word, this should be can and not cab here. I am sorry about the spelling mistake. Using concrete descriptive details. Vivid description can bring a moving immediacy to any argument. When you describe something vividly, when you describe something in detail, it provides a strength to whatever you are saying, and it helps the author relate, or sorry, the reader relate to whatever it is that you're saying. Now, this can be done in terms of when you're writing about literature, when you're doing a qualitative study, when you're presenting an ethnographic in detail or ethnographic paper where you are talking about your own experiences in a particular situation, and then distancing yourself and unsituating yourself and talking like a researcher, and then going back and becoming a part of that situation and then talking about your experiences and dancing between the two. So, at that time these descriptive details would be very helpful. Then using figurative language. Now, what do you mean by figurative language? You paint a detailed and vivid picture by making striking comparisons between something you're writing about and something else that helps a reader visualize, identify with, or understand it. So, you use metaphors and similes, etc., to highlight the importance of what you're saying. Again, this is of much more use in literature, in qualitative research, especially in biographies and ethnographic studies, than it is in hardcore data based or experimental studies, but this is of value. So, that is all we have time for in this lecture. We will discuss some more about how you can or how you can go about writing your draft, and then making outlines, and then finally wrapping up your argument, and that will mark the end of the lectures for week 2. So, thank you very much for listening.